show videos, but I think
Fresh.
ready yet? Okay, so good afternoon. Those of you who don't know me yet, my name is Tatsushi Arai. I go by Tats, and I was supposed to introduce to you today's event, the speakers, the organization, etc. However, I have just found on the spot a better person to introduce, who is Melissa, who used to be my student in conflict transformation, and who is the one who introduced me to them. So I thought rather than my doing not so best good introduction, I would just hand it over to Melissa for a proper introduction.
So, hello, my name is Melissa Shuttlerow, and I am an alumni here at S.I.T. I just finished up my capstone in November of last year, graduating in May of this past year. And I know Gary through a friend of a friend when I was actually taking one of Tots' classes, post-war development. One of the projects is we had to interview or do some research on a development organization and then write a paper and give a presentation on that. So I went down to Amherst, Massachusetts, where Gary just happened to be at, and interviewed him about the Marigold Fund, which was founded in 2008. Is that when you kind of started?
Officially in 5.
Yeah, okay. 2005, the fund was, the organization was started basically to help the Afghan people in the Khakan province, education, medical, just social services, and throughout the years, Gary and I have been in touch with one another. He's been back over there and here in the States, and when he started putting out feelers for doing presentations, I invited him to come on up to S.I.T. He's located down in Amherst, and he brought along with him Amina, who is doing her postdoctorate work in UMass, and she has recently come back from doing some evaluations of midwifery projects in that Marigold is a part of. So I'll let them explain a bit more since I was kind of put on the spot. But thank you guys for coming, and I'm actually really surprised by the number of students, so thank you guys for showing your interest in coming and supporting them in their project.
Thank you, Professor Tats. This is a particularly challenging talk because normally I give a small, sometimes not even at all, a little introduction that right to talk at people, throw out a lot of concepts and ideas that underwrite or that kind of come out of the experiences I had working over in Afghanistan. With a group like this, where you spend most of your time thinking and talking and studying these issues, that's kind of exciting for me because I can talk and imagine that the zone out time will be about 20 minutes further ahead than it is for most people. But the challenge, along with that, at the same time, the challenge is that there's a lot to say. Once you start opening the door a little bit, I want to pack in lots of things. So I'm going to risk probably trying to skirt over a number of thoughts and ideas, some of which are abstract, some of which are more practical. I understand that we're going to break after maybe 45 minutes.
Yeah, I think,
or just transition into some,
yeah.
Okay.
We can see the energy level.
Okay.
And we can take a 5-minute break to stretch.
I'll be watching you even
But
if you watch
basically,
me.
you two take lead time, so we have to take a break, and I'll follow your lead.
Okay.
Yes.
And because what's going to be important for me and for Amina, my colleague, is hearing from you guys too. I wouldn't mind a wee bit of challenge, or just questions, whatever. I would value that. When I come back to the U.S., it's really important that not only am I kind of able to take part in public conversation about what's going on over in Central Asia, but even some of the more thoughtful things. Actually, this is all sort of coming into the disclaimer that I don't really need to, but I'm going to, so that you'll like me to start off. That I say is that you're looking, or I am presenting you as a person who is more in many respects a student. I'm much more of a student than I feel like I'm a guy who's gone through years of training and preparation and study. I see myself as a layman, as a common man who has, through various interesting adventures, found himself in Afghanistan at a very interesting time in history. So I lack, which isn't a terrible disadvantage, but in some respects it is. I lack the experiences which I now sort of project back as a fantasy. I wish I could have done sufficient language training and thinking through theory and learning and studying issues of development and conflict. I haven't done that. I've done a fair bit of that on my own informally. I read a lot. I try to listen to a lot of people who are doing this sort of thing. So I'm delighted that in places in the world like here we do this sort of thing. I think it's wonderful that you're here doing this. And so if you could share a little bit of the benefit, with me, particularly during the discussion section, I'd appreciate that. So yeah, I have, for myself, I've kind of jumped disciplines. I've jumped profession by staying as I did in Afghanistan. I went originally, I thought it was going to be like a year or 2-year kind of humanitarian interlude, Peace Corps thing. I was taking some time off of grad school. And within a year, it threatened to become a career, and it's been 8 years now that I've been there. So I'm figuring things out a lot. And another big theme, which we'll maybe unpack or talk about a little bit more as we move along, is kind of what I consider a big issue, and that is, on the one hand, doing things well, doing things professionally, with accountability and care and concern. In other words, being professional. On the other hand, doing things for love, passion, things that you actually might care about something. There's a tension there, and I'm fascinated by that, trying to figure out how do you get the most, get the best of both, and how do you maybe avoid some of the excesses of either the pitfalls of either side. Anyway, quick, today's talk, which I figured out in the past 3 hours, so it'll be a lab experiment for me today. I'm going to spend a little more time unpacking some ideas and thoughts, a little background for me, and then I don't want this to be the me show. I want to somehow, this is impromptu dancing, so we'll see, where we can get you to jump in. And then after here, I'm going to rely on more visuals and a map and a lot of photographs. I take photographs, and this has become, to the extent that I've understood and we've realized that talking about our experiences there and relating them to the Western public has become very, very important for us. The camera becomes a really critical tool. And so I guess it's sort of like, real journalism where we understand how important it is to communicate to people back here what's happening. So the best probably of what I have to share with you today is sort of me narrating images. That's the fun part, and that'll be in the last section here. We'll talk a little bit about history, and I'll give you kind of a rundown of some of the things that we're doing, and then we'll take a break for discussion. So, all right, exciting. All right, I left. I was working in Boston as a case manager for asylum-seeking refugees coming here, and I was also in theological seminary. I was an older student, mature admissions student, I was told, which is pretty funny. But before that, I have been involved in a lot of different things. I've been really much a generalist. Grew up, since I was a kid, off and on building things. I've always been fascinated by design and domestic architecture, things like that. But I left in 2003 for what I thought would be a year, maybe a 1.5 year break. And then when I was there, I realized this is going to be a long project for me, possibly the rest of my adult life maybe. I started off working for a more conventional NGO called the Marigold, called Shelter for Life International. Most of the projects we had for the 5 years I did that were U.S. State Department funds. And then eventually, gradually, it evolved into what was originally pocket money, then a bunch of friends getting involved, and then we became a 501c3 charity here, and then an NGO, registered NGO in Afghanistan. We started the Marigold Fund. We were full-time. I was doing Marigold Fund on full-time by 2008. In our mission, we have a two-part mission statement. Very simple, pretty broad, maybe even vague, intentionally vague. One is to help Afghans rebuild their country, and that carries with it some practical implications, programmatic notions of bricks and mortar and training projects. And the second is to establish substantial friendship and understanding between Afghans and Westerners. We decided to make this an unovert and intentional part of our mission statement, rather than to presume such a thing would happen. We decided that we wanted to regularly evaluate and check on ourselves in that were we coming from and ending up with results that had to do with relationships. And so this is another part of that. And along with that too, there's some suggestions I'll share more about here in a minute, of recognizing context. Even as we try to be professional about what we do, I think it's probably more important that we recognize that we are sort of actors, we are subjects like the people we're working with, the Afghans there on the ground. And so that relational emphasis is really important. Okay. Just for me, a little bit of background. I mentioned home building has been a big part of my life, especially when I was younger. Hospitality and homemaking are things I'm really fascinated with, studying how different cultures do that. I know that for me, my happiest and most productive moments in my life, it took me 40 years to realize that, but was when I was either getting or showing hospitality. I've always thought that's a great mode to be in. I grew up, my parents were activists involved in the civil rights movement and the anti-Vietnam War movement. That had a huge impression on me and my worldview. I carried with me, and since then, an interest, both objectively, I try objectively scholarly, but also as a person who's sort of in the mix of the connection between violence, ethnicity, and religion. I've always been fascinated by that, troubled by that. Spent parts of a couple of years in Northern Ireland working with a peace and reconciliation group between Catholics and Protestants, nationalists and loyalist communities. And took one personal fact-finding trip for part of a month to the Middle East, Palestine, Israel, to see if I could learn anything more about that situation. And I'll also mention too that before 9/11, I was holding what were sort of gradually fading hopes that I would go to the Balkans. I really wanted to see how things were in the former Yugoslavia and the Balkan area. I was from 2000 to 2003 in theological seminary, and I had the part-time job I mentioned with the Asylum Seekers. And September 11th was obviously a particularly important, punctuated moment in my own history and the history for most of us in the U.S. I found myself utterly, as well as horrified, fascinated by what's to come from here. And I think, like a lot of people, I was thinking, as important as it is that we figure out what happened and why this happened, I reckoned that there was no guarantee that we were going to have the right and proper response to how to respond to 9/11. And I started thinking about what could I do. So my answer, my sort of creative, personal, my own one little guy's response was, I've got a few skills. I know how to work with refugees. I'd like to see sort of the other end of the refugee spectrum, where the situations are, produced that brings refugees, that sends refugees out. I got a job working for the Shelter for Life International. I was project manager. Most of what we did, in addition to building a few schools and infrastructures and bridges that we built about 800, a little bit shy of 800 homes for returning refugee families. That was State Department money, and for me it was kind of an interesting accident to be an American working with an American-based NGO with American money. So I found myself in a position of thinking, hey, I'm kind of a de facto ambassador for my country, and how I carry myself and work with Afghans here is really important. Anyway, while I was there, even as I was grappling with sort of these responsibilities of how to run a project well and trying to learn that quickly, I would see, sort of the human scale, people that were kind of falling between the cracks and things, and I decided that against the advice of some of my supervisors, that I did want to invest some time and concern in thinking about and maybe acting upon some of the things I was seeing. I was in a fortunate situation where we had a lot of big projects going on where we were, but they were all sort of on the finishing side. And so we started off with 7 expats in our office, and then by the time half a year had gone by, there was only 2 of us left, and then 1. I was the only person left. Told them that I would really like to stay on for a while longer and see more things, and we had a few small projects. And the benefit for me was that as we got more and more money that got devoted to other offices in Afghanistan, we were sort of on the margins. We were sort of the weird kind of Roman province off to the side, and so people didn't pay a lot of attention to us, and I got to run things the way I thought were appropriate. And one of the big changes for me was to try to economize the amount of practical time we would do on projects and increase the amount of time we spent talking with people, negotiating, getting to know them, understanding the shape of their needs, how they saw their needs, better than what we would typically do, which is sort of rush things through. We pay probably more attention to the donors than we would pay even to the people on the ground that we were trying to help. So, and then I'll just mention too, and this maybe will come out naturally, but I also, as much as I appreciated and liked having the opportunity to be in that role as an American in the way described, I also started looking at for me, because I think of the way I'm wired and the things I care about, was some of the limits of political aid, where there's lots of politics and a lack of patience and short deadlines and the need to report and to come up with good numbers. I'm more into let's hang out, let's drink tea, let's get to know people, and then do projects around that context. And also, again, this problem where we were sort of rushing to find projects to get them done, to sort of demonstrate and prove that we were capable of doing them and that the donor should give us money. I found myself increasingly unhappy with this approach. So for me, the 5 years, while positive in many respects, showed me that I don't want to do this much longer. I wanted to do something else. And that's how we, and me and some friends, Afghan, American, 1 or 2 British friends, started thinking about starting a small group, which is Marigold. Not big into recreating the wheel, but for me, one of the most important values was to stay in the community where I've been for those 5 years, to build on the relationships that I've been forming. I've been such an adventurer and a generalist most of my life. I've always bought from one thing to the other, and I thought, here's a place where I had a hunch I should really stay put, develop, work in these relationships. And then, actually bringing you up right to the present, 5 years with Shelter for Life, 3 years with Marigold, and we'll talk about the projects. Came home about a year ago for what I thought was a 2 to 3 month break, and already the previous month there had been some very tragic things that have started to happen up in the Northeast where I'm from, and you'll see, including the murder of a couple of particular mentors for me who 2 men who to me were sort of the uber humanitarians. They were the exemplars. They had both lived there for 35 and 40 years, and they were leading a team. You may have heard about this in the news last year. They were leading a medical team up to the Nuristan Mountains. On their way back, they were hunted down and executed. And I watched them. I was with them when they packed for the trip, and so it was pretty devastating just to have them not come home when we were waiting for them. And these 2 particular men who led the group of 10 it was really, really hard to fathom that they left the world this way, because these guys had been through amazing scrapes. They knew Taliban people. They were natural ambassadors and had inroads to Taliban and to other groups that very, very few Westerners had. Admired and respected by Afghans in the way that few Westerners are. So their murders were tough. And then since then, I've had one close colleague leaving our office kidnapped. And we've been studying and observing very closely events going on in the northeast in Takhar province. And we've seen the security situation there slowly degrade, unravel. And there's some interesting reasons for that, which we'll get to. So that security situation, coupled with the fact that I'm working nearly twice as hard to get about 2/3 the amount of money that we've enjoyed getting each year in the previous years, means that we're delaying. We're almost at the point where we're ready to pay for one or two of our bigger programs, and we can start those in the winter. But it's taken longer than we thought. And the other thing too is that I kind of partly joked and whined and complained also with my colleagues in the board of directors that we have about how I've been there a little bit too long on my own. I've been sort of this crazy hermit Arctic research station kind of place, and I temperamentally, as well as just professionally, and how I see how one lives and how one does work. I love my privacy, but it's best to be functioning with team members. So I've sort of watched my spiritual, intellectual health and my professional capacity has been sort of gradually wearing down to the point where I'm kind of somewhere between, sub-professional, imbecilic level at times. And so we're trying to address that, and we're saying at this point we're looking at that I will not return for long periods of time unless and until I've got 2 or more colleagues joining me. So we're trying to figure out the implications of that as well. Okay, biography. Okay, so now we're going to think more about ideas and concepts. So hang with me. These are more abstract things that may not be important to you, but I just so you know what kind of drives me to doing this kind of work over there. I thought I'd share with you. To me, there are these sort of perennial issues about believing or knowing something and then acting upon it. To me, going there was an exercise of thesis and praxis, wanting to know something and wanting to do it. And also trying to observe the balance between those two things. I think that part of life involves, of course, we all have a different maybe vocation for how we go about doing things. We may major or minor in one thing, or somebody else does something else. But I'm into, wanting to avoid getting locked into just simply a laboratorial, navel-gazing sort of constant thesis without the wisdom and the benefit that can come from acting. Nor do I want to just be out there doing stuff without reflection, without getting advice, counsel from people who are thinking through things. So that's a theme I think is very important. I mentioned earlier on about doing things for love and doing things well professionally. One of my favorite quotes has been quoted by about 20 or 30 people over the past 1,000 years. And it's the one version is: the dwarf who stands on the shoulders of the giant sees farther than the two. And to me, I'm getting a lot. The more I sort of think and reflect on this classical statement, the more I get out of it. And to me, it's another kind of a moderating kind of wisdom that says that tradition is really important. Cutting oneself off and just constantly trashing the old, revolution, do something new. To me, usually for the most part, the dividends are pretty low with that, pretty unwise. At the same time, kind of wooden tradition where innovation and forward thinking and new ideas are kind of put down, again, unwise. I think we function as cultures and as individuals when we see a healthy integration of the two, when we are both benefiting from the wisdom that's gone before us and also looking ahead, charting new territory. And to me, the world of development and peacemaking, my goodness, this is volatile, fascinating, plastic sort of stuff. but I think this wisdom still applies. Another thing that's been a huge motivator for me, and I find that is often a great way to interact with people in the world, when you're just relating to folks as a guest or talking through things or trying to explain something, is the importance of story and narratives. I've been motivated by stories a lot, even fiction. I'm a Tolkien, Lord of the Rings fan, and geeks who are into stories like that are often told that it's sort of an adolescent flight from reality. For me, it's quite the opposite. It propels me, motivates me to action, to do things. I also am fascinated by and kind of believe in the idea that people don't have to be spectators, that they can actually do things, that they can step up and do something. And the idea of not necessarily accepting what you're given, what you're told, is also very, very important. I've just got through reading the Half the Sky book, which I imagine most of you have read. And then another book I'm reading is the story about a parliamentarian in the 19th century, early 19th century lady, called William Wilberforce, who was a playboy, born into privilege. He was the guy who eventually was responsible for the abolition of the slave trade in the British Empire. He decided that I'm not going to just play the game, play the part of the rich boy who goes to Parliament and has his political career, but I want to do something better, something deeper than that. All these stories I find important and really motivating. And then finally, with the section, it's also important to let you know that even though for us it's not evangelistic, it's not a trumpeting thing in a discreet but very plain and honest way, for us Marigold is a faith-based organization, which has to do with how we understand and look at categories like what is development, what is justice, what is peace. Merely being just sort of a private thing, for us, and for me, this informs categories, how we look at and do things. And even as I say that, even as we think about our identity, we're very much aware that, let's say particularly religion, can be a tremendous problem. It's a source, or the correlation between conflict and religion is huge, it's inescapable. The paradox is that sometimes it also provides a means for peacemaking that like few things can. And as a person of faith, I often recognize that I am sort of in there, playing the role, I'm doing it, but I'm also really interested in trying, if I can, to step back and say, how's this working? Is it a good thing, or of a problem, or a help? And then this last section, and we'll move on. These I would call sort of more practical dynamics, things I'm kind of working through. I would call, quote, spiritual reasons for what is interested me in development work and going abroad. Just a kind of a quirky anecdote was that when I was living in Boston and working with asylum seekers and studying theology, culturally, I'm Christian, into Christmas, stuff like that, kind of a fun story with, the little, the thing with the snow in it, and the very comfortable sort of nativity narratives. What I never really noticed and cared to really look into very much until I started working with refugees was that part of the story of this nativity story that's so important to me is that there is international intrigue, there's superpowers invading local powers, there's a family of refugees who have to escape. They become asylum seekers, they go down to Egypt, and I never really looked at that before. And I thought, that's pretty interesting, that's actually kind of meaningful. And so in a very weird, you might find it sort of an odd reason, but for me, trying to understand human migration and suffering and war and how those things relate to each other, for me, is, among other things, a discrete way of doing theology, which are categories that I kind of meaningful to me. More political and historical reasons, to me, asking questions about who we are as an American. What's America? Why do we exist? Where have we come from? Where are we going? the past couple of years, I've been attending more to the talk about nation building and looking into sort of the factors that go into the ethnic conflict in Afghanistan, and I can't help but, more than I usually do, is to ask questions like, so okay, how's my nation doing on the factor, the index scale of development and an ethnic conflict, and on stuff that's gone on in the past? And as I look at some of the issues that we have in the past and things that are still going on right now, I'm thinking, wow, we have a lot of work to do here. But one of the things that makes it the American experiment particularly, I think, interesting and important is that we have this disproportional impact on the rest of the world. And what compounds the problem, as I see it, is that most Americans aren't aware of the impact that we have on the rest of the world. And I think it's a fair question to ask, is that a sustainable attitude? Is that a sustainable state? Can a powerful nation that enjoys all sorts of things and has such a huge impact, for better and for worse, in the world, if we don't really have a kind of an accompanying wisdom that can recognize and discern the implications of that influence, then I think we're in trouble. Or at least my grandchildren are in trouble. Anyway, I found myself more lately just getting prepared to go to Afghanistan and thinking about ethnicity and religion and conflict. To me, looking at history is terribly important. And again, I'll throw out a couple of analogies for you. There is, nations have myths, so they're very sentimental. And in America, we have one which goes back to some of my ancestors in Massachusetts, which has the idea of building a city on a hill that's shining. We have the Statue of Liberty. There's this idea that we're going to be really great, we're going to be really good, we're going to be sort of take the best of Western civilization and evolution, and we're going to stand up as an exemplary civilization, shine the light of freedom and knowledge and whatever else on the world. And the world can sort of see the light and approach the light and maybe come here if you're lucky. There's another, however, metaphor as well. This is a little sort of weird, but I think it's common. I don't know if you know Bruce Carberg. He's a musician. I'm a fan. I like him. And I remember there's a song of his that was particularly meaningful to me back in the day. It was about Nicaragua, and he was talking about the American embassy looking like Dracula's tower over the hill, looking over Managua. And I have also, being into mythology and things, I have sort of pictures of evil ziggurats and things in my head. For a lot of people in history, today in the world, America is a blight. It's a bad thing. It's a source of woe. One of the questions, again, I ask is, if we're some kind of edifice, or if we're some, whether it's a shining tower or some horrible growth that plagues the world, we cast a shadow. And I'm interested in, and I think Americans in particular should be interested in, what is it like to live under that shadow? And for me, my own little simple way, I thought, or simple or complicated way, I thought, I'll go out there. I want to be out there under the shadow and maybe look back and see, how do I look? How do we look from a distance? So that's another theme that interests me. I don't know if anybody here's like anybody who's a Spider-Man fan. I grew up reading Spider-Man comic books, not just the movies, but the comic books. And there's a very important legend. There's a myth. There's an ethical kernel around the Spider-Man story. Would anybody care to utter the sacred phrase? Does anyone know?
Great power.
That? Who said it? Somebody was saying it.
I was starting it off and saying, with great power.
Oh, with great power.
Comes great responsibility.
I know it's cliche-ish, it's pat, but I think it's like really true. With great power comes great responsibility. Spider-Man's Peter Parker's Uncle Ben says it's going to be when he dies. So, great power comes great responsibility. And then one other kind of little story I'll tell you, and then a little bit of historical context, and we'll pick up the pace a bit. There are places you can go right now in Afghanistan, and I am not very well, intimately acquainted with such people, but I've met people for whom the spectacle of an American bomber is it's a terrible thing. They've lost family members who were going to a wedding, and an errant U.S. bomb wiped out 40 family members. I have to work hard to imagine what it's like for somebody to be in that kind of position where you've lost half your family because of an American bomber, which arguably is connected to American policy. So for some people, the American bomber representing American power is a truly catastrophic, horrible thing. Now, considering my kind of upbringing and my anti-war upbringing and all the things that I've digested and held to over the years, you can imagine my shock when one of the first surveys that I did when we were trying to work with the local government to choose the villages that we were going to be doing our housing projects in. We had to identify those villages or the village networks that had sort of lost the most during the fighting of the past 3 conflicts, especially the most recent Northern Alliance Taliban conflict. And we wanted to come up with some sort of equitable system for who got housing. So we were doing a survey in one of the more remote upland villages, an Uzbek village. And when I got there, we found out that we were the first Americans to be on the ground since the Taliban had left a couple of years before. And some of the people came out and ran up and were laughing and running, and they hugged me and they were shaking our hands, and they were saying B-52, B-52, they were saying all these different words. And so anyway, we sat down and they talked, and they said, we were waiting for you, we were waiting for you. We knew that when the B-52s came, that the Taliban's days were short, because the Taliban was occupying the northeast, where they were. We'll look at a map in a minute. And they said, when we saw, these are pious rural Muslims living in northern Afghanistan. They said, when you saw your B-52s come, we knew that they were the angels of God that came to liberate us from our oppressors. And these guys were sincere. This is their experience. This is their law. This is how they interpreted an episode of their life. So the absolute weirdness, I'm like hearing American B-52s being called the Mullah Allah,